Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and the guest this evening is Scott Houseman, the City Councilor representing Ward 4 in Beverly. Welcome, Scott.
Good to see you, George. Nice to be here.
And there's been a lot going on in the City Council these days, and I had a couple of public meetings, and I guess the big issue right now that's going to be dragged on for a while is the Bass River overlay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a question, I guess, is it a follow-on to all the work that's being done on Rantoul Street in response, I guess, to the governor and the mayor of Boston interested in transient-oriented development, or is there something else going on that I'm missing?
Well, there are a lot of layers to what's going on relative to that particular proposal. One is, the city looking to provide affordable housing. The Commonwealth at large looking to build up the housing stock to try to help moderate or bring down housing prices. From the city's point of view, if there's development down there that brings in additional revenue, which allows us to provide services to the city residents. There's the climate aspect of transit-oriented development, which the theory being that the more people you have around the commuter rail system, that's fewer cars on the road. So there are a number of different aspects to the initiative to do that. I certainly think that that's a prime section of our city's waterfront. Mm-hmm. Well, prime is a relative term because I'll just say it is waterfront, but right now it has a lumber yard and a National Grid parking lot, primarily in that section. Those I don't think can possibly be described as the best use for good waterfront property in the city. So trying to come up with some kind of proposal that will give rise to a better use for those for that location would be great. At the same time, I know residents value having a local lumber yard in particular, right? So trying to make sure that we can hopefully keep that business in town, keep that business in the city, is also part of the challenge. So there are a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, and the other question that comes up is, we got a waterfront on the Bass River, but it's got a contamination issue. And the last I heard, the city was still struggling with how do we clean up the Bass River and do something with the debris that they scoop out of there, and where can you dump it? That's still an open question?
Yeah, so to go back a little bit, the contamination is primarily in the river. It's not on the land next to the river, with the exception of a small location that's in the National Grid parking lot, which has already been sort of addressed. The contamination is in the river. About a year and a half ago, we had money from the state and from the federal government to dredge the river. The dredge barge got all the way up to at the mouth of the river and was ready to start work when we found out that someone at the Army Corps of Engineers had made a mistake a number of years ago, and they pulled the permit literally at the 11th hour. And so we sort of are back to square one to a degree. There's still contamination there. It is still the goal of the city to try to address that contamination. And right now, the city is going through a process of doing its own research to determine whether we could afford and whether we can locate an appropriate place in which that contamination could be buried once it's dredged. Because the issue that caused the Army Corps to pull their permit at the last moment was the level and type of contamination was not appropriate to the proposed site where the dredging material was going to go. So it's basically on the city right now to come up with that kind of a location, and money is being spent to try to figure that out.
Yeah.
So it is still the goal of the city, and we'll sort of see where that ends up. But that's an active part of not only providing good use for the river, because it is filling up with silt. United Shoe used to dredge the river every 25 years or so, and it hasn't been dredged now for over 50 years. So it is silting up. But that also connects with the Bass River overlay in terms of what kinds of uses might you have on the river that would connect with development that might occur along the river.
Yeah, that's
So
the other
another
thing.
layer, if you will, to that whole question.
Well, and that's the thing I think that's been hanging this project up for, I think, about 20 years was mentioned during that one of those conversations with the City Hall, that the issue keeps coming up and you keep stumbling into, oh yeah, by the way, and then back to square one again.
Yeah.
So it's an obvious place to invest in transient-oriented development because it's right next to the train
Right,
station.
right.
And it's in the section of town that would tend to be densely populated. So it fits, but it just isn't happening. It just keeps dragging on, and it gets to be a...
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the aspects, sort of big picture or overlying aspect of that is what kind of community do we want to be physically, architecturally? There is a lot of push-pull in the conversation around redevelopment of Rantoul Street. What Rantoul Street used to be, I think most people would agree was nothing to write home about. That does not mean that the redevelopment that has gone along has been universally appreciated. Some people absolutely like if you will, the new Rantoul Street and the development that's going on.
Yeah.
But change can be hard.
Yeah.
Many people don't like change, and I think the jury is out on exactly how the city, with its regulatory mechanisms, can help shape a redevelopment of that area in a way that most satisfies Beverly's sense of who we are. And that's particularly impactful to the residents of Ward 2 and the residents of Ward 1 who will be looking at that area in Ward 2. But, if there's a lot of redevelopment there that results in a lot of new cars, we already have a lot of traffic issues.
Yeah.
So threading the needle, I think is a real challenge. And from my point of view, it's better to do it right the first time than
Well, there's no
rush into it, right?
Yeah, there's no going back to fix it once the buildings are up.
Right, those buildings are going to be there for 50 to 100 years.
Yeah.
So
And
multiple generations.
That gets into the real issue of where is Beverly going? And I can remember when Bill Scanlon was running for mayor, he started this discussion about transient-oriented development, and I went through the exercise of putting a circle around every one of the train stations. We had 5 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the map of Beverly started to look like the Olympic flag with interlocking circles. And the question will come up pretty quickly that our ward, we both live in Ward 4, we've got a train station in Montserrat. And right now, built up around it is single-family residential homes for the most part. There's 1 or 2 duplexes around, but that's pretty rare.
It's a pretty homogeneous single-family home residential area.
Yeah. And the question is, how do you convert something like that into TOD? There is no open land in that area. That means somebody's got to pony up the big bucks to buy out a bunch of single-family homes to put in some sort of multifamily. And I can't see this happening. So you can go through the rest of it. You run into the same problem in North Beverly. That's pretty well built up around that train station.
Yeah.
I can't imagine Pride's Crossing going along with it, even though the station has already been shut down. But it's the same thing with the farms. So, yeah, it sounds like a good idea until you try to implement it.
Well, the transit-oriented development initiative is a, whole Commonwealth initiative, right? So it's going to impact different communities and different locations differently over time. The idea is at least to have a 50,000-foot level policy which helps promote that kind of development. It's not going to be the right kind of development for every single location. One of the things that I have observed as a city councilor is that Beverly has, I think, always been on the leading edge of providing, within the regulatory schemes available to it, trying to provide affordable housing for its residents, or a certain stock of it. And we've always exceeded the state required minimum to avoid developers being able to come in setting aside our zoning laws. So I think the last I checked, we're somewhere around 12% affordable
that's
housing.
That's the magic number.
Having said that, I have adult children who are getting to the age where they're going to be looking at housing, and they're making a decent income, but saying, I can't really afford to live in Beverly. I need to look at New Hampshire, and that message from my eldest child is something I hear all over the place from people in Beverly who have children roughly the same age. And the affordable housing stock that we have is mostly geared toward lower economic earners in the city. There's a big sort of section in the middle, and that's a large part of where the crunch is. Beverly, in my opinion, is not going to solve the state housing crisis and the regional housing crisis all by ourselves, right?
No.
And I actually mentioned at this week's city council meeting that the new policy that's come down from the state about requiring a certain amount of multifamily development as a matter of right within a certain distance of commuter rail stations in the state, I think is a step in the right direction. But we really need to be looking to our North Shore neighbors, who also have rail stations, who have not really been, not only not stepping up to the plate to allow, if not actually encourage, more housing development, but generally speaking are opposed to it.
Yeah.
I won't name our neighbors, but they lie north of us.
Yes. Well, we've had Andrew DeFrenzer on the show.
Yeah.
And he's talked about some of his challenges around Essex County.
He's certainly run into them firsthand.
Andrew also makes another point that I think is very valid, that, there's affordable housing, and I think Don Preston, when he made his presentation at the city council meeting, also mentioned that, affordable housing by definition means you've got to be making $75,000 or $80,000 as a family. Well, okay, that's one definition, but there's a lot of people that work in Beverly that don't drag down that kind of income.
Right.
And this is where I think Andrew mentions the concept housing that is affordable.
Yes,
and
that's right.
I think this is one of the things that gets sort of lost in the shuffle, that we made affordable housing, we made the 12%, but there's a lot of people that live in Beverly, that work in Beverly that live in New Hampshire, like you say, and I'm experiencing the same kind of thing you're talking about. My granddaughter and her partner just bought a house in New Hampshire for that reason.
Yeah.
And they're making decent money, but
Yeah.
it's the way it is. So there's got to be some kind of mechanism, and I think one of the suggestions came out of Minneapolis, of all places, where they just eliminated zoning requirements for single-family houses.
Allowing more than only, in other words, that's right, eliminating the requirement that all housing in a certain district only be single family.
Exactly.
Opening the door to multifamily.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I've been studying that for a number of years. So it started in Minneapolis, then went to Seattle. In both cases, it became a very divisive issue for the communities. Didn't stop the initiative from passing. But there is sort of a sense of a social contract, an expectation by many people, if you will, a traditional expectation, that I bought a house in a single-family district. I like the way it is, and that's my expectation. My property values are based around that. My sense of quality of life is based around that. If all of a sudden it becomes an area where lots of becomes more dense housing, there's a lot of more mixed multifamily housing. That's not really what I signed up for, and that's not really what you promised me.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the argument that is given that sort of pushes back against making those kinds of changes. I wish there was a way to satisfy all the seats at the table, but I think that if we are going to really in a meaningful way address affordable housing that's affordable as a challenge, we're going to have to be open-minded about the kinds of things that maybe are not the first things that come to mind as a way of solving the problem or addressing the problem, but that we sort of have been backed into having no choice. So one of the things that's being proposed, being studied, and will be coming before the City Council is what's known as ADUs, affordable dwelling units, which are basically taking a garage or a small room above a garage, or a small, converting a tool shed to a slightly larger structure in a backyard, and allowing for residents in their single-family home districts to have some of these very small structures that would allow for folks to live in those structures. It's still very much, for Beverly at least, very much a program that is in the works and that will be talked about and discussed and debated. And the specific proposal hasn't even really been finalized, but it is coming, and that is one way. I think it will have probably a marginal impact, not a huge impact, but it's one tool in the toolbox, if you will, as a proposal to help address this larger issue of housing that's affordable.
Well, the idea of a multifamily house, excuse me, really is also a mechanism for wealth building, because as one of the city councilors pointed out, Todd Rotundo, when I was discussing with him, he and his brother started out in a duplex.
Yeah.
He was on one side, his brother's on the other side.
It's a good way to get started. Yeah.
You got somebody to help you pay the mortgage so that you can get something going. And the concept of a city with a bunch of three-deckers, that's the kind of area I grew up in Providence, and it happens. And you get used to the idea. My father's house was a single family. The house on either side of us was single family. But you go down the block, another house, and there's a three-decker and a three-decker and another single family. So that kind of an area is not totally foreign.
Not only not foreign, but in our immediate neighborhood, because you and I live not so far away from each other, there are multiple structures which are multifamily, right? on Appleton Avenue, on Pickett Street, and there are condos where there are more dense developments where one of the old elementary schools used to be on Prospect Hill.
Yep.
So they're perfectly within the character that we have now.
Yeah.
So it can happen, but people don't like many people are naturally resistant to change and new ideas, and so it'll take some time for people to be accepting of those proposals if they're going to be at all. I think in many cases.
And we started this discussion, we got into it, and one of the drivers of all of this is the price of housing in Beverly especially keeps going up and up and up. And you got into a discussion, appeared in the paper on it, about why do we always have to have a 2.5% increase in the tax rate? And this year, lo and behold, it's 1.5%. So that seems to be a major improvement until I went and looked at the assessment on my house. And the assessment went up 13%. So I think this is one of the things that I don't think gets discussed very often and doesn't get looked at. The total tax bill you get is a product of the assessment increase and whatever the rate increase is.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen the bill for next year yet, because we're only in the third quarter.
It'll be higher, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. And how much higher am I going to be when I see it? So I guess the other issue is, we need to raise money to run the city. And you talk to a bunch of people, and everybody's got a project that says, oh, yeah, this is what we got to do. And it's only going to cost us a bit more. And the Public Works Department always needs another truck or another vehicle or another something or other. And the push is on for electric vehicles, which are more expensive than others. Yeah. So, there's a lot of places to get it. But how do you get to the point of looking at this thing and saying, enough is enough?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that I have, so I've been on the council for 10 years. And one of the areas of interest for me really has been understanding municipal finance. And one of the things that I have realized is that structurally, to provide the services that the city wants to provide and to undertake the capital improvement projects that it wants to provide is really dependent on new growth every year. So let me sort of unpack that a little bit. So a capital expenditure program might be a fire truck that needs to be replaced. We recently replaced a fire truck that had been in service for 20 years. And when it came time to replace it, a new fire truck cost more than $1 million. Most people probably would support the idea of making sure we have a fire truck that's ready to go when we need it, right? But you have to pay for that capital expenditure program. The way the city affords or has revenue to pay for those capital expenditure programs is largely comes from what's called new growth, which is new development. I have used the phrase that the city is addicted to new growth.
Yeah.
And I find myself very frustrated by that. But structurally, the way our municipal finances and that of all the cities and towns in the Commonwealth, and I suspect even across the country, although I can't speak to any place outside of Massachusetts, really is that this new growth, quote unquote, revenue from new development in town, whether it's a home renovation project or a new building down on Rantoul Street, is what really provides the revenue capacity, the budgetary capacity, to replace that fire truck, just for example.
So really what you're saying is we have geared up our spending to spend every cent we get our hands on.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, George.
And
so,
in order to pick up these extra projects, like a new fire truck
Yep.
or repave a street,
Yep.
we depend upon new growth for that delta in income.
Essentially, yeah. So I'll give you a small list of capital improvement projects here. I won't be long, even though the list is long, okay? So City Hall doesn't have air conditioning in a lot of places, and now that the police station has moved out, we have a whole section of City Hall where we can relocate city staff that are presently renting and bring them back to City Hall.
Yeah.
So refurbishment of that, $12 million. You mentioned the public services building, $25 million. School roofs, the elementary schools, they have a useful life. $1 million each for 5 roofs. Bass River dredging, we talked about that, $5 million. Refurbishing the Beverly Golf and Tennis Building, $5 million. Lynch Park Carriage House, $4.5 million. If you think those kind of building improvement or maintenance projects are not to your liking, we've got Stanley Street water main, Bridge Street water main, water meter replacement, the pump station at the water servicing facility, the new updating and refurbishing the Folly Hill water tank, $2 million. All of these are very expensive budget items.
Yeah.
And the way that the city structurally is, and other cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth are structured to pay for those, largely comes from new growth. So you would like to think that if our property taxes increase at 2.5%, that alone, that increase alone, would be enough to provide all the services and capital expenditure projects that we need. I've been very frustrated to find that it simply ain't.
So.
It simply ain't so. And I don't really have any. I mean, I've looked at, thought about, talked about this for some time. I may not be the brightest bulb, but I have yet to come up with a solution to how to get out of that sort of structural way in which we have capacity to provide the services that Beverly residents want.
Yeah.
So it's a problem. I absolutely agree, but I don't have an immediate answer for you in terms of having a good solution to it.
Well, fortunately, we just ran out of time, so we don't have to.
I had a feeling.
So we don't have to come up with a
Well,
solution.
we'll try working on that the next time I should come back.
Yeah,
How's
we'd
that?
like to have you come back and
Sure.
continue this discussion, especially on the finances, because I'd like to understand a little bit more about
Sure.
what new growth really is. How the hell does that factor into the calculation?
Sure. I'd be happy to do that, George.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
And again, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching us this evening. And as usual, if you've got some comments, you'll notice at the ends of the credits is my email address. Send them to me. And if you have some points of view you'd like to express, there's always room for you here at the table. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.